Right, let me begin with some, what I hope is common ground. Reducing the structural deficit, which I know you tackled in your panel last night, is clearly a necessary but not sufficient programme for the economic recovery we need. Clearly, we need to help. It helps to set us the condition, helps to set the conditions for growth, giving us stability on the macroeconomic side, and also space. Continuing to service a large deficit obviously crowds out the kind of private sector growth that we all want to see. That's why the overall strategy must be to make our economy more competitive. We lost competitive advantage under the 13 years of Labour, falling from 4th to 12th place in the rankings, way down other important international educational comparisons. That's why we have to have a better balanced economy. I am still stunned by the single statistic that in the last 10 years of the Labour government, there was only one job in 10 that was neither in the public sector, nor in financial services, nor in London and the South East. So we clearly have to have a better balanced economy, and we do need a more coherent economic policy that combines the best of fiscal and monetary policy. And I think one of the advantages of George Osborne's policy is that fiscal policy can allow monetary policy to operate alongside it, and vice versa. And I think it's also important to emphasise before we get on, and I'm sure I'm going to hear from my colleagues here, some of the more radical ideas that we need to do to pep up the drive for growth. It's perhaps just important to remind ourselves of what we are doing. We are cutting tax, for those who constantly call for tax to be cut. We are cutting business tax across the board. We are cutting corporation tax right down to the very competitive 23%. We're cutting small business tax down to 20%. And if you think about it, we're also cutting capital gains tax through the reliefs, the very important reliefs that have been introduced for entrepreneurs through the EIS scheme and VCT changes and so on. We're cutting tax. We're also simplifying tax through the new Office of Tax Simplification. And above all, on the tax side, we're making tax pay by making sure it's always more worthwhile to work than to claim benefits. So we are doing a lot on the tax side. On the regulatory side, there's a moratorium on regulation for the very smallest businesses. There's the red tape challenge, scrapping some £350 million worth of regulation. And there are big changes on the way in employment law, the latest changes to industrial tribunals, for employment tribunals, for example, being announced this week. And finally, we are trying to do more for small and medium-sized enterprises, making sure that 25%, at least, all government contracts now placed online, but that 25% of them are awarded to the small business sector, encouraging new business startups out in the regions by abolishing national insurance for the first 10 employees, and so on. Can we go further and faster? Yes, of course. We look forward to the various ideas that my fellow panellists have and that you have. I'd like to end by throwing out two. It seems to me, if you look at how job creation works, it is the very smallest businesses that we do need to help. That very first step, which I remember making, from being self-employed to taking on the first employee and building a very small business. Those are the businesses we need to concentrate on. And I think we need to focus on those things that work, those types of small business that work. And if you look in your village, you will see the newsagent, often an Asian family newsagent, where they are exempted, of course, as a family business from many of the regulations that apply to other businesses. I think we ought to learn from that and start to exempt the very smallest, the micro-enterprises, the very smallest and newest businesses from far more than simply national insurance. And not until they get to a much bigger scale should we start to apply the full gamut of regulation. And secondly, and related to this, given the scale now of youth unemployment, particularly across the Mediterranean countries, 10, 20, 30% of those under 25, and increasing in our own country, we do need to put at the forefront of our efforts the rights of those who are currently frozen out of the labour market. And I think that means simply tackling the acquis in Brussels, the entire weight of the existing employment legislation, and saying we're not accepting any more that we have to have this particular directive working the way it was on the statute book because it's been there for 20 years or 30 years or whatever. We have to fight a war against EU regulation right across the piece, however long it's been on the statute book, and say, is this piece of legislation going to help or hinder our young people from getting into work in the future? So, we've made a start, I think, in setting the right macroeconomic climate. There is an awful lot going on in terms of cutting business tax, cutting regulation, helping small business. But I would like to see us go further and faster in encouraging the very smallest businesses of all, and in repealing some of the European legislation that is currently such a handicap. Thank you.